I'm Frank Craven. Thanks for tuning in to What's Ailing Healing America, a question we have a right and duty to ask and answer. Thank you for inviting me into your living room. I'm very glad to be a part of your evening tonight, and I have with me two gentlemen that are very interesting and intelligent. Bennett Kremmen and Mr. Ray Rogers. Ray Rogers has been a champion for labor, right? And there's a union busting problem in this country, but you're trying
we bust the union busters.
You bust the union busters.
The union busters.
That was scary when Reagan and Bush came into power and reversed all of Jimmy Carter's environmental and human rights policies. And suddenly, we're looking at this ongoing new world order, a world empire that's never ending in its ceaseless greed, huh?
It is no question it's ceaseless greed, and you wonder how many more billionaires we're going to have out there, because more and more of the money is just flowing to the very top.
It's ridiculous. To be a billionaire is a moral crime. How much golf courses, how much money do you need? It's absurd. Money's meant to circulate.
By the way, I'd like to say something about Ray Rogers. You may remember that movie Norma Ray. Ray Rogers was the man who ran that union organizing struggle and won it through new techniques that he developed, in which he entered Wall Street and attacked that rapacious company, which was Stevens and Company, knitting mills in the South, using the techniques and the customs of the corporations themselves to defeat them. Ray invented that. Also, Ray, when they were about to drill for oil in the Arctic Wildlife Refuge, one of God's greatest places. I've been there. I can't tell you how gorgeous it is. The caribou hordes run through there.
The Quechan people. It's where our life began. The
absolutely
first people.
Terrific. Well, there were certain labor unions who wanted a few jobs that the drilling oil there might have brought them, and there wasn't a lot. At a meeting of the AFL-CIO, Ray went into that convention hall and convinced some of the labor leaders that this was bad, that there weren't enough jobs to justify that, and they should not back that drilling proposal. And the oil companies were depending on labor support in order to get that passed through the government. Ray Rogers stopped that. This gentleman stopped the drilling in the Arctic Wildlife Refuge.
Thank you.
And he's done many other things along those lines.
I understand that the Eskimo people always had the best teeth in the world with the whale blubber and all that, and then when Coca-Cola moved in, suddenly all their teeth were rotting, right?
Well, you had up there with the Eskimos and the people out there and up in Alaska area, the territory, what they call the black tooth syndrome.
Oh, yeah, what's
and
that?
This is where they put Coca-Cola in the baby bottles, and it rots all the teeth and into the gums. It's just, it's really awful. But let me just say about that victory. There was somebody that was very critical in that. When I called on a local labor leader who had a union of about 300 members at the Board of Elections, a guy by the name of Richard Wagner, who was a delegate at the CWA convention. I called Richard and said, Richard, I need to get labor on board. And he said, look, I'm going to the convention next week. What can I do? And Richard stood up on the floor. Even when the leadership was not really looking to pass this resolution, he brought it up on the floor, and he got, I think it was unanimously passed, that the CWA was totally opposed. And that really began
the drilling
the movement,
in the Arctic.
the oil drilling in the Arctic, where the building trades and the Teamsters were supporting it.
He got it going.
He got it going when I called him on that. And then we had this incredible database, so we then mailed out tens of thousands of letters about the issue to labor unions all around the country. The first call I got was from the head of the AFL-CIO in Alaska, chewing me out. Before I got done with him, he didn't want to talk to me anymore, because I told him that, basically I made it very clear to him he was on the wrong side and why, and he was on the wrong side.
Well, most CEOs are on the wrong side with this corporate greed that's out of control. Huh?
look, if you see something you feel passionate about and they're wrong, I'm very pro-union, and man, do I support workers' struggles.
Right.
But I've also challenged abuse of certain labor leaders. And
which often happens. Unions get corruption, the pension welfare, the sweetheart deals. They get fat, they make money.
And they need to be challenged. And,
Yeah.
And I applaud those that do that.
I was happy. This is one of my proud moments. I actually had a resolution for AFTRA that I insisted that when Dennis Kucinich was on the floor, that we support Resolution 333 to impeach Cheney. And they printed it up, but on the floor they wouldn't argue it because it's, we're a broadcasters union. They spent an hour wasting time, so we couldn't just say, I agree or I disagree. I endorsed to impeach this criminal called Dick Cheney, who's behind Enron scandal, the Enron blackouts, the BP oil spill, and he has his fingerprints all over Halliburton with those sweetheart deals, no lid, no bid contracts. In the old days, that was called graft and corruption. When a politician would profit, he was head of Halliburton, and in 2002, it was trading at $12 a share. In 2003, after the invasion of Iraq, it went up to $80 a share.
The saddest thing about the whole thing is the lie about weapons of mass destruction and the millions of lives lost, whether it be American lives or Iraqi lives. And that was a tragedy. And Cheney and Bush.
Nobody went to jail.
Nobody went to jail. And
there were no war criminal trials. There was nothing. They walked.
Right.
And the mafia couldn't have walked out of court any more
they
viciously
stole
than
the
they
elections
did.
in 2000. It's an illegitimate mandate. Gore won the popular vote, but they got a coup d'etat with the Supreme Court.
By the way, Ray, I think you should talk a lot about what's going on here in New York around how they're trying to break the construction workers unions and how they have scab labor. They're trying to get rid of the labor in all of these work sites.
Rats and everything. A lot of striking.
And that there are buildings that are starting to collapse with this scab labor, and that the AFL construction unions in New York better start paying attention.
It's a $20 billion industry, construction. And what we did is we created a concept called the Campaign to Stop Construction Sweatshops. Certainly people in New York understand the concept of sweatshops. And what you've got, what is a construction sweatshop? It's where they bring in these workers, and a lot of them immigrants, okay, whether they're legal or illegal. To me, every worker is legal and deserves to be treated fairly.
Yeah, all people are legal. This is the land of immigrants.
Exactly. And what they do is they'll pay them 12, 13, 14 bucks an hour, maybe at most 16, 18 bucks an hour. No health benefits, no pensions. If they speak up about safety on the job or the equipment, they can get fired. All right, and this is what's happening. These are construction sweatshops. And so we got involved.
Aren't some of the cranes that have collapsed in New York related to this?
Yes, I would say that that's a good example. Every time I see, what would get me is when I would see a lot of these construction workers. There was a case on Park Avenue, I think a half a dozen. This was not too many years ago, collapsed, the scaffolding. These are all non-union.
Right.
And they got killed.
And right around my block there, 51st and 2nd Avenue, 7 people died when that crane fell through a building. And it fell on the bar called Foo Bar. It was called Foo Bar.
Isn't the mob, the mafia involved in this scab labor?
We actually did a campaign. Our first campaign to stop construction sweatshops actually went after TIA-CREF, the Teachers Insurance Annuity Association College Retirement Equities Fund, because they had a big ownership stake in the project. And so what we did was we pointed out to them, we developed a campaign, very strong campaign, raising some very serious issues that TI-CREF didn't want to address. As part of our strategy was not only raise the issue of construction sweatshops, but also that TI-CREF was heavily invested in tobacco. I think more than $3 billion of teachers' money and stuff into tobacco. That's kind of I don't know how that works out, as well as Coca-Cola. So we brought these issues up. But one of the things we laid on them in a meeting, when we got involved with the Carpenters Union, New York City District Council of Carpenters, 25,000 member union, they tried to get the attention of TI-CREF. They wouldn't respond to the union at all. We got involved. We got responded to very quickly by the CEO, Roger Ferguson, who I've had dealings with in the past. And to make a long story short, we ended up getting a meeting. They had 5 of the top people headed by their general counsel, Jonathan Fiegelson. And one of the things we asked them is we raised one of the issues of one of the subcontractors on the job. And they didn't know. They said, everything is quality control. We have the best people out there, whatever, all the same old crap that Coke puts out. And I said, well, here, let me just show you that the head of this subcontractor was indicted for racketeering. Now, again, if you're not convicted, I don't want to, somebody, you should have your day in court. And they're raising their heads. They didn't realize that. And they says, but, that's not important because, again, maybe the person hasn't done anything wrong. Then the next papers I laid down that not only was he indicted, he's been convicted, and now he's waiting for his jail sentence. Yet they're out doing the job. And I said, something, that wouldn't even bother me so much if it wasn't a construction sweatshop. So they booted them off the job. But the key thing to come out of this, T.I. Kreff never wanted to be the object of another one of these campaign to stop construction sweatshops. So they rewrote codes of conduct to make sure that if they're involved in any such project again, that it will not be with a construction sweatshop. So kudos to T.I. Kreff, okay, and to the CEO, and to the general counsel and the other people involved there, and to the New York City District Council of Carpenters for taking that fight on and winning.
And to you, Ray, for taking the lead in this movement. This is what's ailing, healing America. Democracy is demos kratos, people power. We have to get involved. We have to be interested in the issues and the problems and can't just complain about, the massive unemployment or the injustice. We have to find our way of addressing the problems and solving the problems, because all problems can be solved.
Let me say this, because I want to say something about Ben now. I don't know how many people may know, but Ben has written for The Nation and for the New York Times and other such publications. And since we're talking about solving problems, Ben you might tell a little story, because I read about this some years ago in the New York Times, where you interviewed these workers who were building cars and were members of the UAW. And I think it gives a good example of how there's so much knowledge, imagination, and skills out there in the everyday worker. Let them become more involved in solving the very kind of problems we're talking about, not the politicians and not the business leaders, but the everyday rank-and-file worker or person out in the community. Ben, could you just...
You should never underestimate ordinary people if you give them a chance. You should never underestimate it, because somebody went to Harvard doesn't necessarily mean that he has a lot of imagination and he's going to lead us into the promised land. Regular, everyday people have a lot of skill, a lot of creativity if you tap into it. I did an article in a recent article that we did in the Labor Educator, which we're both involved in, that the American labor movement has to start using its head and start being more imaginative and start tapping into the natural imagination, ability, and cunning that ordinary people have, and not let the corporations and the lawyers and all that rig the game against them. They have seeded that they don't realize their own power. They literally do not know what they have in their hand. Well, we have articles about the power that they do have, and we've sent it to them. They should read it. Along those lines with what you asked me, Ray, I did an article. There was an automobile plant in Ohio called the Lordstown plant. It happened to be in a period where the young baby boom generations was very young, and this was a new plant. They were doing a new line of cars, and all of the workers were in their early 20s. Well, for 30 years, the union and the management would go back and forth making these rules. You could take 2 minutes to take a piss, but don't piss too long, and come back on the line. Maybe you got 2 more minutes later in the afternoon, and they would negotiate and carry on and go on, and they made all of these rules governing the assembly line. These young guys didn't care about the rules. They were young and rebellious, and if you remember the 60s and early 70s, they weren't going to, chicken shit was not their cup of tea. So one guy would be standing in one spot on the line, and next to him would be his buddy who'd be standing on the line, and they would be working away and take their 2 minutes and their lunch break and their 5 minutes and be negotiated and all that. And they began to look at it, this is ridiculous. You know, I could do your job and my job at the same time just as well. And hey, I want to call my girlfriend, cover for me. I'll go out and hang out and live a life for a half an hour. You handle both jobs, then I'll come and I'll spell you. And they developed a term called doubling up. Well, the evidence were in the inspection stickers that the inspectors would do when the cars would come off the assembly line, and they discovered that when the line was run the way these young workers had arranged it themselves through just a natural rhythm, the cars had less defects, they needed less repairs, they were in better shape when they came off the assembly line than all of these contract negotiation things that went on for 20 years on how to run the line. Well, the union,
people on the
right,
front
they knew what was going on, and they knew what to do, and they were young, and they were bold, and they did it, and they created a better assembly line. Well, what happened? The International, the labor leaders at the top, got together with the company and bust the Lordstown local and got rid of the doubling up and brought us back to the baloney that became, that they big shots that they were, negotiated and worked out through all these hours and hours of negotiation going nowhere. And they let a beautiful thing go away. And that General Motors went bankrupt some years later is no surprise to me.
Well, they sort of build in obsolescence, and the cars are getting lousier and lousier. In the old days, they were built to last and were good, solid vehicles. Right. And now they dent like that, and they fall apart and everything because they love to, you're going for repairs. And, and I'm sure nowadays with the technology, we've walked on the moon, we split the atom, and I was told you can run a car on the garden hose, on water, and God knows what. You know, we have the technology that we could go 100 miles per gallon on vapors alone by sparking the pistons. There's actually a video, a film out on YouTube called Gas Hole that talks about how in the 50s they were tooling around to spark the pistons on with vapors instead of guzzling gas. So why not? We have the technology, but the CEOs and the corporate infrastructure wants to keep a lid on the progress that really could be made if we really allowed for transparency and communication dialogue amongst the forefront of the workers who know better than anyone what the problems are and what the solutions are.
And they also want to make workers robots, okay?
Right.
I mean, Ann Landers once said, the Lord gave us two ends, one to sit on and the other to think with, and our success will depend upon which end we use the most. Well, give these workers credit. They have a brain.
Yep.
They have imagination. They have skills. Let them do some thinking.
Lordstown
They're not just
proves
robots.
that.
Let me give another example of the inherent power in every individual out there. I was a Vista volunteer. I worked in the poorest conditions in Appalachia. Hunger and malnutrition as bad as any third world country you'd ever seen, right here. This was back in the late 60s. And I can tell you right now, I learned more from people who could not read or write a word than I did from all my PhD professors in college. And none of my PhD professors could have survived probably a week or a month under the conditions that these impoverished people in Appalachia to survive. And again, it just shows you the ingenuity, the ability of people. And even in the labor movement, one of the things that upsets me with labor leaders, they talk about wanting their membership involved. Well, look, don't just talk about getting the membership involved to come out and hold signs to a demonstration while somebody gives a speech. Get them involved in every element of challenging, oppression, challenging unfair treatment. Again, unleash their knowledge, their skills, their imagination to go with their energies. Just don't try to take their energies, but let's use their minds as well, and you'll start winning a lot more of these battles.
Right. And the labor movement that you and I work on a lot, Ray, has to wake up and realize that American democracy now depends on them. That it was the labor people who put Teddy Roosevelt into power, and he put in the antitrust laws and bust the robber barons. It was the labor movement that got FDR, gave him the energy behind FDR, and we have Social Security and all the wonderful things of modern New Deal created, and it is only the labor movement got to wake up and realize that their responsibility is more than getting 5 cents more an hour in their contract or doing this or that or this or that. They literally have to save the nation because the Democrats aren't doing it, the Republicans aren't doing it. You see what they're doing.
Well, man, I don't even believe in Democrat or Republican anymore because it's computerized. How can how can you trust a computer for the consensus of the vote?
Well,
and every time,
just watch where the money's flowing, then you'll know what. Go ahead, I know what you're.
You know, I mean, you know, the Green Party. You know, Ralph Nader was a hero. He couldn't get over, or Ross Perot, he was a conservative billionaire. He couldn't get over. Anyone who's an independent third party who's outside the little Republican Democrat shell game that they smoke and mirrors make us think, oh, we're free. And, you know, they're not, they make it so difficult for an indie party to actually get on the ballot. And if they're on the ballot, they bamboozle their I remember for Cynthia McKinney and also recently Sherry Hunkela and Jill Stein in the Green Party, their emails and speeches were sort of sabotaged through some sort of malevolent CIA mechanisms, and they just, you know, we just know that computers don't count the consensus, the real. You know, the poll, in the old days there was poll watching and you pulled a lever and maybe you could be a poll watcher, but nowadays how can you control this kind of thing? It's ridiculous.
Yeah. I saw Ralph Nader on Face the Nation, and let me tell you something. Not one politician out there could have ever gone head-to-head with him. Not a chance.
Right.
Not a chance.
An intelligent patriot. And remember, Jill Stein was actually arrested. She tried to get on the debates, a legitimate Green Party presidential candidate. And they arrested her, not to mention what happened at the Republican convention. It's not even a convention anymore. These things are scripted. The convention is supposed to be where everyone gets together and you hammer out the platform and they vote and they decide how they're going to proceed. Now it's all scripted. You can't even protest. We live in this disguised dictatorship that's not even disguised anymore.
You know, I don't know if a lot of people in the Green Party, Sherry Honeckler, which is running for vice president, I mean, she has such a history of being out there in the streets fighting for poor people. Okay, I mean, this is, and then she also ran, before running for vice president of the Green Party, she was running for sheriff. I donated to her campaign in Pennsylvania.
The sheriff?
For sheriff, I think it was. And, but again, you know, the Green Party has certainly put candidates out there that should be right up on that front stage, debating with the Democrats and Republicans and any independent.
But that would threaten their BS, you know. In a given moment, the Green Party might get over if they start at the small level, mayors of small towns, assembly, and then to try to affect governmental, you know, laws and stuff. But really, it's hopeless when we think about Congress and Senate. Most of them are millionaires. They're not drug tested. You know, the government recently shut down, but they didn't shut down their gym or their little shuttle bus, did they? These people are just out of control, out of the loop. We should have to put a wall around Washington, D.C. and keep all the criminals in one place.
Well, no, one of the big criminal things they're doing now is cutting people's food stamps.
Oh, really?
Can you imagine with the hunger and the problems in our society, how they're cutting the food stamps now? Yeah. It's going into
but they're not cutting Trident missiles.
No,
no. Boeing, Martin Marietta, Raytheon, GE. These people are making mega profits, and it's an assembly line. It's ludicrous that we should be producing these bombs and drones, for God's sakes, that are killing people innocently. You know, you go to any bar, you see football everywhere or baseball. You don't see what's going on in the streets of Baghdad or Kabul. I mean, please give us a break. Stop this war. No more war, por favor.
By the way, I'm a great sports fan, but since you opened up a point here, and I love football and baseball, but why does the public have to pay for these arenas? Okay, because when they build these big stadiums, it's usually, you know, the public's money and tax money. All these tax breaks and feed-ins they get. Why? If these sports teams are going to succeed, let them do it on their own. Okay,
Yeah, Rudy Giuliani, big Yankee fan. Ha, ha, ha. I was brokenhearted when they tore down old Yankee Stadium. My grandfather helped build that stadium. He was a trailblazer of the Lathers Union. He took a bullet and knife wounds, because in the old days, in the 30s, when they were union organs, they went with baseball bats, and they said, you don't cross the line. And they really were forceful, and they needed to stand up for what's right versus what's wrong, to get fair wages and a decent pay. And overtime if they're working 10 hours, instead of just being ignored and shunned off. And nowadays, everyone's sort of wussy. There's not that fighting spirit to say, we have to demand justice.
Ben, you wrote an article and you got a response from a well-known former labor leader who was the head of the communications workers, Martin Barr. He responded to the article you wrote, and then you responded to him. Could you fill us in on a little bit of that?
Well, with all respect to Morton Barr, he was one of the more progressive labor leaders when the communication workers who handle AT&T and Verizon and all those major communication companies, they would bargain with him. He had a million members at one time, or close to it, in the union. And he did, I respect him for a lot of the things that he did, but he was he emailed us, the labor educators, the name of where we publish these things. He emailed us for an article I wrote about the right to work laws and how they were invading Michigan and Wisconsin and Indiana. And these are laws that come out of the Confederate slaveholding South. I mean, these are terrible laws. And I just didn't see the leaders of the labor movement out there battling like they should have been screaming bloody murder. It should have never stopped making that an issue. They have such power. They have such money. If they don't know their own power, and I don't know what it was, laziness or compromise or indifference or what have you, that made it such a feeble effort to face up to the attacks that the labor is getting every day now from the press and from the corporation and from the Koch brothers and from the Tea Party and all that. And membership is going down and wages are flatlining and the profits of the corporations are soaring. And so in this article that Ray's referring to, we outlined what the labor movement can do to revitalize itself. And there are many things it can do.
Like, for instance?
They don't know how to handle the media. They handle the media like rank amateur. The Boy Scouts handle the media a lot better than the labor movement. And I mean that.
Yeah,
I don't know what it is.
The press is bought and sold by the defense contractors.
You
They cheerlead war. They don't really want to get involved.
Don't let that stop you. One thing we can learn from Jerry Rubin and Abby Hoffman, they knew how to tweak the tail.
Yeah, but
of
they
media.
were yippies and revolutionaries.
Whatever they were, they knew how to get on the tube, man.
Yeah.
And if they wanted to be on the tube, they got on the tube.
They ran a pig for president.
Right, all right? They
Abby
used
Hoffman
humor.
threw
Right.
Dollars
on the stock exchange. They had imagination.
Yeah.
They had a certain artfulness. They had humor.
Right.
They had daring. They had all kinds of things. They were terrible politicians, but I won't go into that. But they had a sense of the media. These were media children. They knew how to tweak the media.
Back then we had more honest media too. I mean, JFK, God bless him, he would give weekly press conferences and he thought on his feet. He was an authentic leader who was intelligently fielding questions that were unscreened. And if I go to a presidential debate or whatever, as a journalist or a public access producer, my questions have to be screened, and usually it's a spokesperson